So imagine waking up. Your head is just absolutely pounding.
The worst feeling.
Right. Your stomach is in knots, and then it hits you. That sudden, crushing realization that you called your boss at 2 a.m.
Yeah, or you pick some massive fight with your partner over, absolutely nothing at all.
Exactly. And your very first instinct is just this wave of pure shame. I mean, we've all been conditioned to believe that this crushing guilt is like the necessary cure to whatever bad habit put us in that position.
Right, because if you just feel bad enough, or if you punish yourself severely enough, that negative feeling will magically propel you into making better choices.
Yeah, but when you actually look at the mechanics of habit change, especially around something as complex as addiction or these long-term behavioral patterns, that entire theory just completely falls apart.
It really does. It's this deeply entrenched, almost puritanical idea that suffering has to be the prerequisite for change. We just assume regret is the primary fuel for self-improvement.
And it's not. The psychological landscape of breaking a deeply ingrained habit is actually completely counterintuitive to how most of us were raised to think about discipline. So today, we are exploring a paradigm shift that could genuinely change how you look at every mistake you've ever made.
It's a really powerful shift.
It is. We're doing a deep dive into the mechanics of shame and habit change, drawing heavily from the insights of Susan Gast. She's the creator of Live Better Sober, and for some context on Susan, she quit drinking at age 37 and has been sober since 1998.
Yeah, so she is approaching 30 years alcohol-free.
Right, which means we are looking at a massive data set here. Almost 3 decades of sobriety moves her insights way beyond just clinical theory and into the realm of battle-tested lifelong application.
Absolutely, it's real-world evidence.
So our mission today is to uncover the critical difference between learning from your past experiences and using those exact same experiences as proof that you are fundamentally flawed.
That's the key right there.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to get to the actual solution, we have to start with a massive paradox for you to solve here. We usually think feeling awful about our habits is what makes us quit them, right?
Right. That's the standard logic.
But Susan's materials suggest the exact opposite. Guilt isn't the cure, it's actually the accelerant.
Yeah, and to understand why that is, we have to dismantle a very common misunderstanding about the phrase shame-free. When people hear shame-free sobriety or, shame-free habit change, they often bristle.
Oh, for sure. They think it's a cop-out.
Exactly. They assume it means a free pass. They think it means dodging accountability, excusing harmful behavior, or pretending that embarrassing moments simply never occurred.
Like you just get to willfully ignore the time you caused a massive scene at a family dinner.
Right. But a shame-free approach does not mean erasing those bad memories. The problem, as Susan points out, was never the memories themselves.
It's what you do with them.
Exactly. The problem is how those memories are weaponized. During her drinking years, she was taking uncomfortable morning-after memories and using them as undeniable evidence that there was something permanently, fundamentally wrong with her soul.
Right, she was taking a bad action and turning it into a bad identity. And that leads to the most insidious part of the process, which is the self-perpetuating cycle of shame.
It's a brutal cycle.
It really is. The sources detail this timeline beautifully, and it's a timeline I think anyone listening can relate to, regardless of what habit they might be struggling with. The cycle begins the moment you wake up.
Do you remember what you said or did the night before?
Yes, and you get that sinking, visceral feeling of dread. You carry that heavy, agonizing emotional weight with you all day long. From breakfast to dinner, you're just hoping you don't run into anyone you offended.
And let's look at what is happening biologically during that day. Your brain is essentially marinating in cortisol.
The stress hormone.
Exactly. You are in a prolonged state of emotional distress. So by the time 5 o'clock rolls around and you finally get home, your nervous system is just exhausted.
It's completely fried.
It is screaming for regulation. It desperately needs relief from the sheer embarrassment and pain of existing in that state all day.
And what is the fastest, most efficient lever the brain knows how to pull to get that relief? For Susan and for millions of others, it's a drink or, 6.
Right. The pain of the shame acts as a massive enabler. The habit isn't necessarily a moral failure in that moment. It's a desperate attempt at neurochemical regulation.
Which, of course, just leads to embarrassing yourself all over again. There's a highly specific anecdote in the source material about this.
Oh, the phone call.
Yeah, the phone call. Susan talks about drinking to escape the crushing embarrassment of the previous night, getting totally numbed out, and then ending up on the phone to the UK at 2 a.m. their time.
Oh, man.
Right. She was just creating a brand new, highly specific, shameful memory to wake up to the very next day.
It is the perfect encapsulation of the feedback loop. The shame of yesterday fuels the habit of today, which generates the shame of tomorrow.
I hear that, and the biological aspect makes total sense, but I have to push back on the core premise just a bit.
Okay, lay it on me.
Doesn't shame naturally act as a deterrent? Let me throw an analogy at you. Isn't shame supposed to function like touching a hot stove?
Uh-huh.
You touch the burner, you get burned, it hurts immensely, and that acute pain is a very clear biological reminder not to put your hand on the stove ever again. Why doesn't that straightforward cause and effect work with something like drinking?
Well, what's fascinating here is that your hot stove analogy perfectly illustrates exactly why we misunderstand habit loops.
Really? How so?
Think about it. If you touch a physical hot stove, the pain makes you pull your hand away because the source of the pain and your method for soothing that pain are two completely separate things.
Oh, okay, yeah. You burn your hand, you go run it under cold water.
Exactly. But in the cycle of shame and addiction, the stove isn't just the thing that burns you. The stove is also your only painkiller.
Wait, so you're saying the stove isn't just the deterrent, it's the actual remedy the brain reaches for?
Yes.
Wow, that completely breaks the traditional model of discipline we're all taught.
It does. Think about the mechanics of what we just discussed with the cortisol and the dopamine. The pain of shame doesn't deter the habit because the habit, in this case alcohol, is the specific tool the brain has learned to use to turn off psychological pain.
Oh, wow.
The burn of the shame doesn't make you walk away from the stove. It actively makes you crave the numbing effect of the stove even more. The very thing you are using as a deterrent is generating the exact emotional distress that the habit was designed to solve.
So if you are relying on shame to fix the problem, you are literally pouring gasoline on the fire while congratulating yourself for holding a hose.
Basically, yeah, you're guaranteeing the cycle continues.
Okay, so if shame is the fuel, we really need to understand how it gets so deeply embedded in someone's mindset. How do we go from, I did a really silly thing last night, to a deep identity level crisis?
Right, because there's a massive difference there.
Yeah, the sources emphasize a huge distinction between a shameful moment and a shameful identity.
This is where we see major cognitive distortions take hold, specifically involving the brain's default mode network.
That's the part responsible for our internal monologue.
Exactly. Our internal monologue and our sense of self. I mean, we all have moments we aren't proud of.
And Susan is incredibly open about hers. She shares these highly specific, cringeworthy memories to make the point.
The ice cream one is pretty funny in retrospect.
Yes, like the time she aggressively pushed her way to the very front of a queue for an ice cream cone simply because she was a foot taller than all the kids waiting in line.
Just bullying her way to the front.
Right, or the time she was blabbing on and constantly interrupting her boss. Even after getting the classic raised eyebrow shut up signal, she just kept right on talking through the social cues.
Which, in retrospect, those stories have a bit of dark humor to them, but they really highlight the core danger of the identity trap.
Right.
The trap is the mental leap from, I did an obnoxious thing at the ice cream stand, to, this is the real me, and I am an inherently obnoxious, broken person.
It's such a subtle shift, but it's so destructive.
When she sobered up and relived those moments, she didn't just review her actions. She took those isolated alcohol-fueled incidents and used them to define her fundamental character.
And when you do that for 2 decades, your default mode network just adopts that narrative as absolute truth. It creates this deeply ingrained autopilot system of self-criticism.
It becomes second nature.
The source actually lists out the internal monologue she lived with, and it is just a relentless mental assault, just a constant loop of, you're useless, you're drinking again, you've gained weight, you'll always be a drunk.
The brain becomes incredibly dangerously efficient at beating you up.
It really does. She does note in the text, with a bit of a sigh, that the weight gain part of that monologue was actually true at the time, but all the rest of those identity-level statements were complete lies.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The text reveals something shocking about this autopilot self-flagellation. Susan admits that constantly telling herself how useless she was actually, and this sounds slightly pleasurable.
Yeah, she writes, and I quote, WTH. Yes, that's how off base I became. It sounds completely contradictory to everything we know about seeking happiness.
It sounds crazy until you really think about it. Let me give you another analogy. Think about the physical act of picking a scab.
Oh, I see where you're going.
We all know picking a scab is a destructive habit. It delays the healing process, it guarantees a scar, it's objectively bad for your body. But in the exact moment you do it, it provides this weirdly familiar, predictable, almost soothing comfort.
Right, because leaving it alone is uncomfortable.
Exactly, because if you just leave the wound alone to heal, that requires patience. It requires facing the unknown. Beating yourself up is a known variable. It's a familiar script that requires zero new effort.
And that connects directly to the psychological concept of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Taking on the identity of the broken drunk is oddly safe because it removes the pressure of having to change.
Wow, yeah.
If you convince yourself that you are fundamentally broken, then by definition you cannot be fixed. So you are completely off the hook. You might as well pour another drink.
Because what's the point of trying, right?
Exactly. Healing is terrifying because it requires hope, and hope requires immense vulnerability. Self-punishment acts as a shield against the hard, scary, unpredictable work of genuine transformation. People will very often choose predictable misery over unpredictable change.
Man, that is so true. So relying on self-punishment is a comfortable trap. And as the source notes, sheer willpower isn't the answer either. Susan mentioned she tried to quit using willpower alone, just white-knuckling it, and that only lasted 9 months. It took 2 more full years of struggling and relapsing before she finally hit what she called the last straw. So if shame is the fuel and willpower eventually runs out of gas, how do you actually rewire a brain that has spent 20 years practicing self-destruction?
Well, you have to start by repairing the very foundation of your psychology.
Yeah.
And that foundation is self-trust.
Self-trust. Okay.
When you are stuck in an addiction cycle, the tendency is to make huge, sweeping declarations. You wake up hungover and say, I am never drinking again for the rest of my life.
Right. The classic morning after vow.
And then because you are relying on willpower instead of structural change, you break that promise 3 days later. Every time you do that, you further erode your own self-trust. You prove to your brain that your word means absolutely nothing.
You just can't rely on a system that you fundamentally don't believe in.
Precisely. So the solution to a massive deficit of self-trust isn't a massive lifelong promise, it's micro-promises.
Keep it small.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The source suggests a very specific, manageable starting point. Tonight, I am not going to drink.
Just to know.
One single small step.
Yeah.
You rebuild the belief in your own word, one evening at a time.
And the evening is usually when the urge is the absolute strongest anyway.
Exactly.
Picture yourself standing in front of your fridge at 7 p.m. The workday is done, the stress is peaking, and the habit loop is just screaming at you. The text talks about squashing that nightly urge, and it introduces a fascinating concrete technique that became her bedrock approach.
The somatic marker method.
Yes. And it's important we define what that word actually means because it's not just a mental exercise.
Right. Somatic means relating to the body, distinct from the mind. This isn't just a cognitive recall. It's deeply physiological.
So here's how the framework operates according to the text. When that nightly urge to drink hits, you don't just try to ignore it or distract yourself. First, you pause. You consciously acknowledge that the urge has arrived. And then you deliberately bring to mind one of those painful, embarrassing memories, like the boss's eyebrow raise or the ice cream queue.
But you don't just think about it.
Right. You make yourself physically feel it. You recreate the pit in your stomach, the flush of heat in your cheeks, the biological state of regret. The text says that actively revisiting that unpleasant physical aftermath is enough to knock the stuffing right out of the urge.
That makes sense. It acts as a powerful biological pattern interrupt. Your brain is anticipating the dopamine hit of the alcohol, and you intentionally flood the system with the physical sensation of the negative consequence instead.
But wait, I have a major clarifying question here.
Sure.
Didn't we just spend the first half of this deep dive talking about how dwelling on embarrassing memories fuels the shame cycle?
Oh, we did.
So how is intentionally making yourself feel the physical pain of an embarrassing memory any different from the autopilot self-flagellation we just condemned? Aren't we just picking the scab again?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the distinction here is absolute genius. It all comes down to the purpose of the recall.
The purpose. Okay.
When you use a somatic marker, you are recalling the memory to be honest about the outcome, not to humiliate your character.
Break that down for me. What does that actually look like in practice?
So when you are in this shame cycle, you recall the memory of interrupting your boss, you feel a flush of heat in your face, and your internal monologue says, I am a chaotic, worthless person who ruins every professional relationship.
Right. Attacking the self.
You're using the memory as a weapon against your identity. But when you deploy the somatic marker method, you recall the memory, you feel that same flush of heat, but your internal monologue says, when I drink, I lose my social filter and embarrass myself in front of my boss. That outcome physically feels terrible, and I don't want to experience that outcome again tomorrow morning, so I will not drink tonight.
Ah, I see. You're treating the memory as objective data rather than a personal indictment.
Exactly. You are viewing the memory objectively to strengthen your resolve. You are being rigorously honest with yourself without humiliating yourself.
Honesty without humiliation.
Yeah.
You are looking at the hot stove and saying, that burns, I will not touch it, rather than saying, I am a terrible human being because I once touched the stove.
Yeah. That cognitive shift changes everything. It completely removes the paralyzing emotional charge from the memory so you can actually utilize the data within it. And this isn't meant to be done forever. Susan actually teaches this as part of a highly structured, practical 66-day framework.
Okay, let's talk about that 66-day timeline because that number really stands out. We always hear that it takes 21 days to form a habit. Why 66 days?
So the 21-day rule is actually a famous myth. It stems from a plastic surgeon in the 1960s who noticed it took his patients about 21 days to get used to their new faces.
Wait, really? Just their faces?
Yeah, it had absolutely nothing to do with breaking complex behavioral addictions.
Yeah.
Modern neuroscience, specifically studies out of University College London, shows that it takes an average of 66 days to form a true new neural pathway.
Oh, wow.
It takes 66 days of consistent action for a new behavior to become automatic. Meaning, it takes less mental energy to do the new habit than it does to revert to the old one.
So for those first 66 days, you use these somatic markers to manually override the cravings while your brain physically builds the new infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly.
You are buying your brain the time it needs to rewire itself.
And you can only sustain that kind of effort if you aren't simultaneously exhausting yourself with shame.
Which brings us perfectly to the absolute core philosophy of this entire deep dive. There is a rule in the text, quoted verbatim, that acts as the North Star for this whole methodology. And I think this is something everyone should literally write down.
It's so good. The memories stay,
Yeah.
the lessons stay, the self-condemnation goes.
The memories stay, the lessons stay, the self-condemnation goes. It entirely reframes the concept of moving forward. It allows for true, genuine accountability.
Right, because it's not ignoring the past.
Exactly. A shame-free approach doesn't mean you avoid apologizing. You can look at your past and say, yes, I did those things. You can go to the people you hurt and say, I'm sorry, and take full responsibility for your actions without letting those actions act as a permanent life sentence.
Accountability without the life sentence. That is exactly what allows Susan, almost 30 years later, to have her family look back on those early days and just laugh and say, well, you were young.
That's amazing.
They didn't hand out a life sentence, and more importantly, she stopped handing one out to herself. The past experience has simply transitioned from being indictments to being teachers.
Because the past drinking Susan is not who she is today. The things you do when your nervous system is hijacked by a habit loop do not constitute your true identity. They just show you a side of yourself that desperately needed a different coping mechanism.
And once you find a healthier coping mechanism, the old data just loses its sting.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We want to pass a direct challenge from the text right along to you. Tonight, grab a physical piece of paper. Think about the last time you promised yourself you'd break a habit.
Any habit at all.
Write down one single memory drinking, related or otherwise, any behavior you struggle with that still makes you physically cringe. Got it. Now, next to it, write down one objective lesson that specific memory taught you.
And focus entirely on the data of the lesson. Just ignore the label you usually attach to it.
Look at what you wrote and ask yourself, is that memory currently acting as a teacher? Or is it acting as a life sentence? Because you have the power to commute that sentence today just by changing how you process the data.
And this raises an important question, one that pushes this concept far beyond just quitting alcohol. If our most intensely cringeworthy moments are, in reality, just neutral data points showing us what doesn't work, what would happen if we applied this exact same shame-free, data-only approach to the other areas of our lives where we feel hopelessly stuck?
Oh, that's a fascinating way to look at it.
Think about it. What if you applied this to a failing career path where you constantly beat yourself up for not getting promoted? What if you looked at the data of your performance without the self-condemnation?
Yeah, just looking at what actually happened.
Right. Or what if you applied it to a toxic relationship pattern that you keep repeating? What if all that agonizing self-criticism you carry every day isn't the penalty you have to pay for your mistakes, but the very blindfold keeping you from seeing the exit?
Wow.
Could shedding self-condemnation entirely in every single aspect of our lives be the universal key to finally unlocking our actual human potential?
When you stop wasting all your energy punishing yourself for touching the stove, you suddenly have a lot more energy to figure out what you actually want to cook.